at the hatchery right now. This is where it all begins. This is where the little chickens begin life.
Well,
it's a miracle of life.
Technically, it begins in a pen full of a rooster and a bunch of hens.
Yeah.
Last night, so everything's been set, but the eggs come in here at this end of the building. We collect them twice a day. See, here's some of the feather lines, and we color code them here. Like this is the high and dry line, and the blue X would be one of the American lines. Anything red is a Hoffman-based line, and then the blue dot's the American line, the other one there. Everything's color coded. We write these on the eggs, they roll out of the pens, and this is our kind of last chance to identify them. Then they're hatched in individual groups like this. And blue is for the wet fly lines, red is the dry fly lines. I've got greens in here, and those are the Hebert lines, because that's where the packaging color comes from. Yeah, here's the greens right now, like that's one of the Dunn lines, it's the D line, the Z is the Hebert Grizzly line. There's a sense, it's just an identification, because we do a lot of pedigree work, individual sires, and it's just how I've evolved my system. I don't know how the other people do theirs. Here's those little historic lines, see how small the eggs are. And then I have experimental lines, like this is a mutation that occurred about two and a half years ago. It's called pewter, I've named it. So I've incorporated it into a leghorn line, which is an egg-laying line. And I've incorporated it into Heberts as well, so I'm making a phytine line out of it. Because mutations happen all the time. It's whether or not you recognize them, and if you see some beauty or utility to them, you have to go about isolating the gene, the new mutation, stabilizing it and perpetuating it. So right now I'm in the process of pulling the barring gene out of it, because it was incorporated in it, and splitting it out to see what it looks like without barring. I can always put it back in. So I'm doing it on a brown line and on a black line to see what the true nature of it. I really like the color. They'll be pulling them out of the incubators probably in the next rack. So those are the kind of things I do. It's sort of a fun thing. When something new happens, it gets me new ideas, and then fly tires give me ideas on how to incorporate it. One of the things in the egg room is you want to set the eggs weekly so they all come out in a group, so we can pull a hatch on Friday, so we set them in different stages on Thursday afternoons. But we start, some of the eggs take about 500 hours to hatch from the time of setting, getting up to temperature, to when they fully emerge and you pull the hatch. Some take 520 hours. So we actually have a rather elaborate scheme about, we set the longer term birds, and that usually means the Hoffman-based birds early in the afternoon on Thursdays. Then we set some Thursday afternoon late, like the Coq de Leons and some of the Heberts. And then on the Friday morning, we set the Silkies. They take a shorter time, or they need to be set later, otherwise they hatch too soon, they're dehydrated for the sexer. But the way you store eggs is you keep it below a threshold of hyper cell division. We keep it at 65 degrees temperature Fahrenheit, and then at about 50% relative humidity. If you do that, cell division is occurring, but just not a very high rate. If there's no cell division occurring, that's the definition of death, basically. So for about a week, you can store the hatching eggs with impunity if you maintain the eggs right, with the right temperature and humidity, and if the hens are healthy and they're normal and everything. But once you take them out of this room and increase them, and our set temperature when we start is about 101 degrees, once you do that, you take them up to that temperature, it's the point of no return. You cannot take them back out. Once they go up above about 72 or 73 degrees, they go into hyper cell division, and you can't set them back and turn them back off. And so once you put them in the incubator, you're committed. So 3 weeks later, we hatch them out. They only spend about 18 or 19 days in the incubators that get turning happening. Then we transfer them into individual pens where all the LLs are all together, so they hatch out as a pedigree group, and that happens in trays where we identify them and mark them, and determine we want the males or the females out of them, or all those kind of things. It's an elaborate system. It's kind of confusing. From somebody on the outside, it would be a little bit on the boggling, but it's grown over the years, and I understand it, and the other staff here that work with it. Like, this is a Hoffman line called the ends, and that's for narrow, for midge line. It's not really too elaborate a name, but it helps us remember it, because this is both grizzly and white, because the white's just a different form of grizzly. It's a grizzly underneath a white gene. That's all it is. but it's the narrow line for midges. Then I have other midge lines, one called the K line, which is everything but grizzly and white. This is all the gingers and the browns. I keep them all in one group, and badgers and duns. So it's a system. These are basically state-of-the-art machines. Each one of them holds 18,700 eggs.
18,700.
They're totally full. It's 18,700. So this is like 56,000 here. And with those machines over there, when they're all cranked up, it's 112,000 setting capacity. But when we get going in the spring, when I'm doing the commercial poultry, all of them are full.
Wow.
And right now I'm using the red machines, and I'll switch the feather lines over to the green machines because they have a slightly different incubation profile as far as temperature and humidity and things like that than the commercials do.
So what's the total capacity when these are full?
112,000 eggs. The set temperature is 100.1. That's the set temperature. It's actually 100.1. These have been in here 7 days, 22 hours. They've turned 198 times. This is the vents at this stage. They're open 16%, and then that's the wet bulb humidity. These things are accurate plus or minus 1/10 of a degree.
Wow.
It's beyond accurate. I'll turn on the water real quick. And the great thing about these machines is they're so accurate. I mean, like plus or minus 1/10 of a degree is so far beyond what would happen in the wild. It's not even funny. But we can even control the CO2 levels in here, which has long-range effects on their, it's called epigenetics. You can impact their later growth rate by controlling the CO2 levels in the early part of embryonic development.
Wow.
It's amazing. But the good thing about these machines, if they ever go out of parameter, then I get a text message.
Wow.
Day or night. And some days I know it's just monitoring, they're setting the eggs, so I get a text message. I know what their patterns is, but if it's the middle of the night, then I can come down here and address whatever problem there is. So far we haven't had any problems.
So now we're in the hatching room. So they've come out of the incubators, and now they take them in here, and they're sorting them out. So they're all divided out.
So that's a Euro hackle. This guy is going to be about 400 woolly buggers by the end of it. So the Euro hackle is what they do bugger packs out of, and also the saddles. We get a lot of Euro saddles that are dry fly quality. Really cool stuff. Right, little fella? He's not too thrilled about what's going to happen.
So that's where the chicks are hatched. We're now going to go see how they find their sex. That's called sexing the chicks, which, Kelly Barnes, is not what you think.
It's a verb that can mean many things.
So this is Daniel, he's our in-house sexer, and we have to have one. We don't like you, Daniel, it's okay, we're glad to have you here. What he's doing is he's sexing the day-old chicks, and what's going on is for a few hours after hatching, only a few hours, the young chickens have vestiges of reptilian copulatory organs still visible, and somebody, obviously with entirely too much time on their hands, decided to look at the rear ends of baby chicks and figure out what looked like a male and what looked like a female. And it's both the structure and how glossy it is and the texture. And the feather lines are particularly difficult to do because one, the chicks are small, two, they're all sorts of different colors by nature of them. They're not all yellow chicks like a commercial line. And what's happening is, these aren't reptiles, but if you remember your high school biology, ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. If you don't remember that, don't feel bad about it. Not many people do. Well, I've only found a few people that actually remember that. But what it means ontogeny means life form, recapitulates means revisits, and then phylogeny is the phyla. So they're revisiting structural things in the evolution or the phyla that they've gone through. Similarity is human embryos, sometime in their fetal development, actually have a little bit of a tail, which reabsorbs and doesn't go to fruition, and they're not born with tails, at least most people aren't. Or they might have gill slits, showing their, fish ancestry there for a little while. And so that's what's happening here. And it's called the Japanese method. I think they must have been the ones that first showed it to the Western world. They had it figured out. Japan has a long history of poultry culture and breeding very unusual birds. But that's what he's doing here. For the feather lines, they almost all have to be vent sex, and that's another name for this, is vent sexing. Some of the commercial lines we can do color sexing. You set up the parent stock where the baby chicks come out different colors depending on what sex they are, or wing feather sexing called fast and slow feathering. But this is a good method. What he does is he squeezes out the meconium that's in the baby chick when they're born, and then he looks at the structure and the texture. And with about depending on the line, some lines are easier to do than other lines. He's about a 95% accurate. And we tell him if he has any doubts, if he's not sure if it's a male or female, we tell him to err on the side of the males, because I'd rather put up with a few more females that he wasn't sure about than throw away any males. So that's what we try to do.
How long have you been doing this, Daniel?
Almost 20 years.
Wow.
We've got millions of chicks.
So are these males or females?
Females. These are females, and these are the mayfly winger females that I was keeping out of a different show line that seems to have the right structure for it. And then down here, those are the historic lines that this hatch want the males out of. And they're very small and delicate, so hard to do.
Yeah.
And then he sometimes checks his work. Sometimes if it's a big day, we don't bother doing that just because we're going to be pressed on it. So these are done? Okay.
Now time to check out all the hot chicks.
Okay, these are 7-day-old chicks. They were processed a week ago, like we're processing right now up at the hatchery. They're all making kind of an anxious noise, probably because they see cheeks and they're worried. They see this is a big guy. And I remember I looked, it's about 1,600. Most of them are rooster chicks. There are a few females in here. But they'll spend the next 11 to 13 weeks, depending on rooster cage availability, in here. And we pamper them as much as possible. It's fresh shavings, and we power wash the barn between flocks and wash it and disinfect it and do everything else. And they look pretty good to me right now. We just turned them loose probably today from the corral. Normally we start them off in a corral so they kind of find the food and water. And whoop, they're going to start running at us. Here they come. They're looking for a mama they're never going to find. So if they hear somebody talking, they'll think, well, maybe that's mama after all. She hadn't abandoned us. But they'll never meet. Yep, they'll start running. This is what they put down about weekly to keep the system full is what we got to do. And we're now up to 7. When we get the current construction done, we'll be up to 27 chicken barns in the system, which I never believed we'd have that many, but we seem to need it. And birds, we have very low mortality. Most of it happens in the first week or 10 days. It's a matter of really finding the food and water and or just being strong enough to make it through the neonatal stage. We provide no antibiotics, but we do give them vitamins and minerals. And then when they're day olds, we give them 3 types of probiotics to colonize their digestive systems in hopes of putting in beneficial or benign bacteria so they can exclude any bad bacteria. And so far we've had good success with that. I haven't used any antibiotics since, I remember I had some in the mid-90s I was using, but I haven't had a problem. We do some vaccinations, but not to combat sickness, but just to prevent them, so they're inoculated for various basic poultry diseases. It's cheap and easy to do. It's just a good safety measure of the whole thing.
Okay, so we've seen all the other parts of the life of a bird. Now we're gonna see the cream of the crop. These are the dry fly hackle birds that you see in the packages.
Here's a classic dry fly rooster bird, and in which this would be called light ginger. And no matter what the body color is, it's really what the hackle color is that determines what you call it. And you can see this has got a rich, kind of like fresh cut straw color in the cape and in the saddle. So that's what constitutes, at least in my mind, what is light ginger. And it's very popular color. And this bird's just kind of striking that he's got a basic white body with a little tail blackness in it, and he has a silver gene in there, I can see. But anyway, and he's got quite a lot of dry fly hackle up on top that's really quite small. Anyway, he's one of the breeder candidates. I'll probably go through him today. But see how calm he is? He's not pretty unroughed up. The chickens here at Whiting Farms, I hope, have some of the best lives in any chicken in the whole world. We kind of pamper them. You have to do that. If you don't give them a good life with stress-free and their own food and water, they just don't produce the feathers, because the feathers are sort of low on the hierarchy of needs for them. First of all, just basic survival, then reproduction, and everything else has to be pretty well optimum in order for them to realize their genetic potential as far as the genetics of the feather growth. I know that because if I don't do a good job with them, I can tell the feathers aren't as good. So the critical thing when you're in a breeding program situation is give them as good of environment as you possibly can. Therefore, the bird is exhibiting its true genetic potential for feather qualities. And so you don't want to, and that's called environmentally induced variability, which you want to minimize. So you're looking at the maximum genetic variability, which is demonstrating the true validity or potential of the bird. So often I go through and flag the top 1% or so of the birds as I go through and harvest. And then those I scrutinize in great detail, measuring the feathers, measuring the saddles, counting feathers even, and then turning the feathers to make sure they turn correctly. And so only maybe 1 in 10 of the birds I've actually flagged as potential candidates do I actually end up being good enough to go in with the hens. And that is referred to as selection pressure, and that is an extremely intense selection pressure. The top 1/10 of 1% is enormous selection pressure, but that's the way you make rapid progress. And I also do selection pressure on the female side, but because we need more of those and I don't produce as many females as I do roosters, it's maybe only the top 20 or 30%, but you're trying to get more bang out of the superior roosters. That's where the benefit of that comes from. And I know pedigree information and physical characteristics, but he's a lucky guy, I think anyway, and he's nice and calm. Over the years, the birds have gotten more and more calm as I select for that characteristic. And you can see the feathers on him. He looks like he's about a 14-16 size saddle, which is a good size for ginger, caddis, and things like that. So, hi, buddy. See here on my left, your right, is the tan dun, and then this is a light gray, which you can see the fundamental color change of that.
So that's kind of a true gray, and
this is true gray. That's the brown dun.
This is almost metallic in the sun.
In the sun, what you're seeing is they call brassiness, and that's a refraction off the cuticle, just like the coq de leon. And typically they have a little bit more color in their shoulders.
Very
cool. That's light gray, and this is light tan dun. So here's a good old Cree. Hey guy. A little bit pale from being in the dark rooster barn, but he's looking up at the sky. He has grand aspirations.
Yeah.
And he's a breeder candidate. I'll look at him this afternoon. I don't think he's gonna make it, but I'll give him a safe try. Hey guy. See, these are my red flaggers that I thought was good. The original Hebrews didn't have quite a saddle on them like that.
Okay, one of the final steps. Birds are now separated from their bodies. And they're being trimmed to fit into the retail packages. So final preparation before they get shipped off to you. So this is the famed Chewy.
It's him.
Master Cape artist. So he's basically just cutting off the excess around the comb area. Boom! Wow. Chewy is on fire. Okay, the last phase before they go out the door is they get picked. They're put in these bins from that other room, and they're all categorized, and then they're picked for orders, and then they go out to you.
These are the all-stars of whiting. They're the ones who make it happen. So if you see this video, put in the comments, thank you.